Almost too much structure.
Ours was like it was like walking into the eye of a tornado. Like, what's he gonna do?
Aren't you my favorite wrong?
What?
My favorite. All right.
Yeah. Are we starting?
No, like I said, you'll know. We're starting, but we're not starting the speech.
Oh, okay.
In true Toastmasters fashion, I'm actually giving a mini speech along with what Ray is speaking about. So I just want to preface this with that. Anyways, thank you so much for coming. I'm glad this matters to us and to you. This is a very important day for myself and for Ray because he's been a very good friend and colleague of mine for a number of years. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Matthew Snyder, and I'm a second semester MBA student here at Loyola, as well as I'm a second semester MBA student here at Loyola and president of Toastmasters, as well as the vice president of professional development for the Student Association as well. So both of this is kind of a joint event this evening, and I'm very happy to have the support from both associations along with me. I would say that I've probably learned about 400,000 different things from Ray. 3 of which are the most important, and 3 of which I really believe to be the cornerstone of my professional development. How I become a better person, how I manage better, how I can literally develop and become a better person. The first one of these is that there's no such thing as a self-made man. Everybody must be said yes to. People in life you'll see think that they're, for lack of a better word, and I can use this intimately, the shit. But they're not. People think that they've gone all this way, they've done miraculous things without the ability of somebody else to say yes to them. Loyola said yes to me. Ray said yes to me. Very important people in your life and in our lives will need to say yes to you in order for you to progress and for you to be a better person and for you to grow. And the cool thing about it is that you get the opportunity to say yes to people later on, or even now in your life. You get the opportunity to say yes to a boyfriend or girlfriend. You get the opportunity to say yes to certain things that you might get to do. For example, I get to say yes to the bond program. That's something that's very important that you get to do, is you actually get to discern where you say yes and what things you're saying yes to. And again, the thing that I found most important is that there is no self-made man. You all need help, we all need help, and it's very humbling to know that. Once you realize that, it's kind of okay. Everything's okay. The second thing, probably my personal favorite, is something Ray calls political capital, which, for lack of a better term, I like to think of it as, I guess, financial, or I would say networking finance, in a way. When you're on LinkedIn and you see all these different people who are connections with you and things like that, you don't necessarily have any pull or push with that person. A relationship, a good relationship, a solid foundation of relationship is based on really good pull and push with a person. Your ability to influence them, your ability to make moves, and your ability to get things done. So if you can't get things done, you just tread apart. And so this idea of political capital is kind of cool. It's like a bank account in a way. Virtual currency, not like Bitcoin, but something a little bit like that, right? Or over time it grows. And it accrues and accrues and accrues. And it's like, almost like a reputation, where it can be lost very, very easily, but it takes a very long time to get a good amount of it. And you need a lot of it to make very big moves, and that's a lot what people do, as CEOs do. They make moves, they make transactions, they do different things that are really, really big in the world of industry and business. And a very simple example of political capital, which I find actually a little humorous, is, say I have maybe 1,000 political capital dollars, and I, as a 26-year-old, call up my friend who happens to be a CEO, philanthropist, venture capitalist, and many, many other things, and I say, hey, you want to come give a speech at my school in a few weeks? And he says,
Sure, my schedule.
he says, sure. And so in my mind, of course, is probably about 100 political capital dollars that I throw to Ray. And one of the things that he and I will always joke about is, he'll probably say, you know, Matt, the last time I gave a speech for free, it cost him 800 political capital dollars. But again, it's all about the relationship that you have with somebody, and again, building that way of being able to pull and push and really make the moves. Political capital is very, very huge. And the very third one is probably the most important in terms of what we can do as people outside of business and just in our lives in general. And I would say Ray's quote for it, and the motto, the creed by which he lived by, is to do the right thing for the right reason. And it sounds a little odd at first, but if you say it again, to do the right thing for the right reason, it makes you look forward to doing something not just because it's the right thing. A lot of people can do the right thing for the wrong reason, and they can do the they can do the wrong thing for the right reason. So instead of just trying to do the right thing, striving to just do the right thing, Ray's instilled in me the ideal that it's not enough just to do the right thing. Do the right thing for the right reason. And when you do that, you actually are able to sort of transcend all the junk that everybody deals with all of the time. You know, you're really trying to make the right moves and striving to do the right thing. Again, not because it's the right thing necessarily, but because you're doing it for the right reason. And we met probably about 3 years ago, and Ray's taken me from an intern at a company that dealt with, gosh, we had about 100 different tech clients, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and we pushed their political agendas. And I was an intern there, and Ray said yes to that. And his chief of staff left, and he said yes to me coming on board and being his special aide. I wouldn't be here today if a lot of people hadn't said yes to me. But it's really, really cool for you to really reflect on the people who say yes. And it's very important that, again, keep in mind all the political ideals that you keep with you, that networking, that political capital. And again, always just strive to do the right thing. Be a good person and do the right thing for the right reason. It's not always going to come back, and it's not always going to be super rewarding, but at the end of the day, you even said it in the car today, everybody needs their own maker. Whoever it is, you have to be able to honestly tell yourself that you've done the right thing, you've lived your life the way you want to live it. And these are the things that Ray's instilled in me. And so tonight, why I think it's really cool, especially for us as MBA students, is that you'll get a really cool perspective on managing these things that I've talked about, as well as just the sort of things you may not have thought about when it comes to public speaking. How to really be effective, how to elicit emotion, and how to get your point across. Because again, at the end of the day, it's all about getting stuff done. If you can't get it done, then nothing gets done, and you don't have amazing people. With that, I would like to present the main event of this evening, Mr. Ray Ramsey.
I'll keep this informal, and Matt is much too generous with that, and I feel very humbled by what he was saying, because I like to think of myself as a steward. So when I get to have time with a young, talented person, I always view myself as a steward. I always tell them that this is a symbiotic relationship. I am receiving probably more than what I'm giving, and so it's really fun for me. And he often hears me brag about all the different people that are doing really well in different jobs, and I have a thing outside of my office that I've always done when I've had different offices and different jobs. I call it the bullpen, and I hire I've had as many as 13 or 14 young interns, and I've literally designed space so that they're outside my office as a CEO, so I can see and witness and interact. And the ideas that I've gotten from them and the energy has been unbelievable. And then so many of them over the years I promoted into high positions out of that. I was once at a company, and I made our chief net officer some really, really young person. Or years ago in Oregon, I was the housing secretary for the state working for the governor, and I remember being in a meeting with her, and she kept staring at my chief of staff. And I think it's because he was 25 and I was 29. And then I looked at her and I said, he's old enough to drink. And so it just got her to like relax a little bit. He can do this job. So, and part of why I promoted young people is because I was promoted at a really young age, and I had the governor in Oregon say yes to me to give me this job to run housing for the state of Oregon. But I stayed humble, because I'll tell you one story, which I'll never forget. And it was, I was sitting in a restaurant. I felt really good. The governor had asked me to do this job. You feel good about yourself. And a friend of mine said, did you see the paper today? And I said, no. He goes, you're in it. And I was like, cool, this is awesome. I'm in the paper. And it's probably about me doing this. But there was one hint that something might not be right, because when he told me I was in the paper, he left really quickly. And so I thought, So I went and got me a paper, and I was sitting there feeling really good. And within minutes, I was looking around because the masthead in the paper said, quote, which I never got, "It shows you how little the governor cares about housing to pick this guy who knows nothing." And it was the quotation. And that was my baptism to politics. And you're sitting there. So all the ego that you had, and then I looked around and I go, do they know that it's because there was a picture? And so I just quickly I grabbed a few of the papers and left so that nobody, would be able to see that. And I've never forgotten that. So it keeps you, really humble. But the other part that I've never forgotten was he believed that I could do something. And so that has always shaped my life, that somebody like that, older, could believe something. So my topic today is the unusual topic of talking about public speaking. So I just want to share a few things with you and then have a dialogue. There's no expert on public speaking, but I want to share a few things because I've spoken to audiences as small as like one-on-one to a couple of thousand in front of all kinds of folks. I used to be the chairman of Habitat for Humanity International, so I had to speak in front of people, different languages. We're in 100 countries, all sizes, all shapes. And there are a couple of universal truths about public speaking, and I'll just share those. First of all, every single person can be an outstanding and an effective speaker. Everybody. I don't care what your voice is like, what your demeanor is, all of that. It's nonsense. People say, I can't do that. I don't want to do it. Oh my God. You can overcome it. So there are some basic things. And one of the most important things is simply to breathe. Because when you get nervous, you don't breathe. And so this pause in front of everybody that sometimes you have is because you should be breathing at that point. If any of you do yoga, you breathe, and you do a lot of breathing. And so one of the most simple things, one of the most basic things is actually take a nice couple of big gulps of breath, and then your voice will sound better, and you'll actually be relaxed, and then you can make your point. And then there are a couple of things, and then I'll get more specific. One is that it is about being authentic. It's not about reading something and the audience feels authenticity. And if you can't be authentic, you have no shot at what you're doing. So if you're up there as the snake oil salesman, doing something, people know it's not authentic, and it's like, ooh, the Shine-O-Matic or whatever. Everybody gets that. That's a train wreck. That's not going to be effective. So being authentic. And I think one of the other most important things for me, and I often say to people is, they say, well, how do you prepare? Because I never do notes. I've even done a commencement speech at my alma mater, Rutgers, in front of 8,000 people. And they were like, ooh, can we have a copy of the speech? I had no notes. People were like, are you kidding? In front of all these people. And that was one time I was nervous, to be authentic, because I never spoken where there was like the big jumbotron next to you with your face like on it. And so as I got up and I made the mistake of looking and I saw myself, and then I saw all these people. And what went through my head is that you have a choice to make. You can come away being a jackass that will forever be remembered as doing a horrendous job, or you can just pour it into this and sort of make it work. And so the pouring in is about being, one, authentic, but the other one is being intimate and being willing to share. So a really good presentation, no matter how small or how big, is about intimacy, so that people feel like that I've somehow gotten to know you. It's not about your resume, but there's the essence of who you are, and there's a level of intimacy, which means you have to share some things. Like I'm standing here today talking about public speaking, but I've just told you some stories about myself, which is a level of intimacy. And so even though we're strangers to each other, you're making this connection, this sense of intimacy. And that's what's important, with public speaking. And then of course you have substance. And so there should be a substantive topic that you're dealing with. If you are authentic, and that means, even if authentic means your voice is a particular way, your voice is okay. There's no perfect, it's not the radio voice, just be authentic. The intimacy is about sharing, being willing to sort of share some things. And I once had to give this speech, and I was really kind of nervous. It was in Harlem, in one of the most famous black churches that Martin Luther King and others used to speak in. And I went there with a group, and then out of nowhere they said, Mr. Ramsey's going to speak for us today. I was like, are you kidding? And I'm seeing this filled with people, and I'm like, a black church where you have these legendary preachers who are really kind of entertainers, as well. So I was like, what am I going to do? And I was sitting there, and I usually pride myself when I don't have to write it out. So again, Got to be authentic, right? So here's what I did. I walked up and I said, listen, I'm going to tell you a couple things about myself. I said, the first one is I am not a singer, because the choir had sung. And they're like, that's all right, baby, that's all right. And so the call responds, and I said, I'm going to tell you something else about myself. And I said, I'm not a preacher. And they're like, that's all right, baby, that's all right. And I was like, and then so all of a sudden I'm established, I'm telling them all the things that I'm not. And then I said, but I have a message. And then I moved right into my message and delivered the message, and people were sort of leaning forward to hear the message. And I didn't try to pretend to be the entertainer, not in that church with the kind of call and response and the cadence, if you've ever been in a black church like that. I was like, no way, I am not touching that, because that would have been inauthentic. I'll never forget a politician, without picking on a particular politician, but it was always like cringeworthy. And I'm a Hillary Clinton fan, but when she went into one of the black churches and started doing this cadence, and I then walked so far, and who speaks like that? You're like, and I looked at that and I said, would I go into a synagogue and go oy vey or something like that? Like, who does that? And people do that, they have like, oh, I'm going to a black church. I'm like, really? And it's like cringeworthy. Everybody's like applauding, but that was like a train wreck. And so you don't have to change, who you are. And so I often find admitting certain things. And so years ago, another experience I had, I was literally waiting behind a curtain. And the first job I ever had in government, because I went from practicing law and then going into government. And they inexplicably picked me. Have you ever been in Oregon? There's a place outside of Portland called Bend, Oregon. When they asked me to take this job, I remember saying to them, are there any black people there? And the sentence started with, well, there's a family. Are you kidding? And so they wanted to put me in charge of economic development. Of course I knew, so if you thought I didn't know anything about housing, I didn't know anything about economic development, because I said, is there a book? Because I was going to take this job and somehow they wanted me to do it. So they make this big deal about me having the job, and I remember being behind the curtain going, really? This is me who you're talking about? And so this was, now imagine this, Central Oregon, there aren't any black people, so the notion of diversity is like a joke. It would be like, maybe a family with twins is diversity. So I am behind the screen, I'm 27 years old, and they're saying all these like big things, like he's going to really help turn the economy. I'm like, hold on, I don't know actually anything about business development. And I was like thinking, I need to read a book, and no one had seen me. They kind of stuck me into town. They wanted to make this big announcement, and then they said, and this was, now picture this, Bend, Oregon, all white, Chamber of Commerce and Rotary Club meeting. So you know what that audience looked like. And then we had the silver-haired head of the department. So you could just picture what he looked like. He fit the bill, head of economic development for the state. And then he goes, without any further, we're going to introduce you to Ray Ramsey. And I just walked out, 27-year-old version of myself. And everybody's like, oh, and everything. He's going to be in charge. So then I used every principle that I'm describing. And the secretary didn't know what I was going to say, the secretary of economic development. So I got up there and I said, let me tell you a few things about me. Same form. I said, obviously I'm black, so I didn't have to say that. That was clear. And then I'm young, so that was also obvious. And so I said, I'm a lawyer, so that was like, check, bad. So I'm like, I'm a lawyer from Philadelphia. I said, I have never been here in your community until today. So remember now, I'm supposed to be running economic development. And I say to the audience, I have never been here. So I'm describing this, and then I could look over to the side, and I saw the secretary thinking, we may have made a mistake, because they didn't review my speech. And so I go through all of these things to tell them who I am. I said, but there are two things I want you to know. This gets back to being authentic and your genuine voice. I said, I have moved here, and this is my home, and I care. And I said, all the rest, you're going to teach me, and it's going to be quite a ride. And I showed up in my office a couple days later, big fancy office. I didn't know shit about what I was doing, and I still was looking for a book when I came home. And I sat there and I said, what's the one thing I can do? All those people liked my speech. I need to go meet them. I need to have the humility of them to teach me about their community, because I do know a few things. And it was 2 years later, after that, when the governor said, meet me at the airport, and made me the housing secretary at age 29. And I used to have to get up in front of audiences. I would have moments where I felt the most embarrassed. I would go to these machine shops, lumber yards, try to get them expand and grow. And people looking like, what are you talking about? And I would make my pitch, and you're on the edge of feeling humiliated, but you make your pitch. And so my other expression that I always say, and I used to say this to Matt, every opportunity is a marketing opportunity. you never mail it in, because you never know who's going to be in the audience, or you don't know years later who you're going to meet with. So I had to take a call when I was with Matt, and Matt's dad is over there, who probably doesn't want me to embarrass him, and he raised a great son. And I had to walk away for a call, and this call was with somebody that I did business with years ago, who's happened to be well placed with Comcast, and I'm trying to do a financial transaction with them. So years later, with this point about political capital and relationships, I was letting him know about the bid that I'm putting together on something that they're involved in. And so I was working that political capital and making that work, and I had to make many presentations in front of them. So whether your presentation is one-on-one, or whether it's mid-size or 8,000, the same principles about being authentic and about being willing to be intimate. And that intimacy is really important, because I've had many times where I've had to raise money or do different things, and I have to look at people and say, I need you. I need you. And it's really powerful when you would say to somebody, I need you with me with this. When I started this NGO, One Economy Corporation, where somebody said to me, which is one of the most humiliating things I've ever had said to me, I was pitching my idea. He looked at me, and I still don't understand this, and you guys are smart MBA students, so maybe you can tell me what this means. He said, Ray, he said, what you've just laid out is an idea in search of a concept. That's what he said to me. And I said, are you still going to fund me? He said, no. And it was humiliating. He said, but do your pitch anyway. So I did my pitch, and I knew it was a no. And 2 years later, he put money into what we were doing. And so sometimes you just have to go through with it, because I said, he still is influential. I think he's an asshole, but I'm going to go through it and do this, because I want to get the money. What am I trying to do at the end of it, right? We are all in sales. No matter what it is, we're all in sales in one way or the other. You're pitching a concept, you're pitching an idea, and actually you're pitching yourself. So one of the things I would do when I would have a smaller meeting, and I would think about, I still do this. If I have a smaller meeting, right, you've got substance of what you're trying to achieve. But I have some other trick that I do. I say, when they're not with me, what are the 2 adjectives they're going to use to describe me? And I often, before the meeting, will think about what those 2 adjectives are. So an example would be, right, so you don't want to be self-delusional. So suppose you say, I want the person to think that I'm high energy and with great ideas. And then you go in there, and you're kind of tired, and you're letting them know that you flew in late, which actually they don't care. And you presented nothing at all creative. Well, why would they think those 2 adjectives? I mean, like I always say, wishful thinking is not a strategy. So if you have a notion of how that you want them, because remember, you read the book Blink, by Malcolm Gladwell. The moment you're walking in, there's a blink reaction, and then you have the opportunity to either go downward without or enhance it. So when you walk in there, the blink reaction, and then what do you want them to think about you when you've left? And so I actually think about that. So sometimes it might be, I want to show them my financial acumen. I want them to know that I'm a financial brain. I want them to think, and I want them to see that I'm a people person. I want them to, so there's always points of emphasis, right? So then you use the opportunity when you're speaking to convey it, and not saying, I want you to know I'm a people person. I mean, really? I mean, that's kind of boring. It's like, show it through your authentic self. Don't just say it. And so I still use that methodology when I'm getting in a business meeting, to sort of getting to yes. And then the other thesis I use is an approach from someone who wrote a book years ago, Robert Usry, that's called Getting to Yes. And so what I want to do when I'm in a business meeting is have that person nodding their head multiple times, because if I can get them to agree on the premise, get them to agree on the situational analysis, get them to agree with me on the problem statement, get them to see that my resolution to the problem statement, to that need case, is a yes. If I've lined up all of those yeses, the probability is very high that when I go in for the close, I can close it. But it's remarkable to me how people come in, and they're not in a get the yes fashion. They're almost combative. They're trying to argue with you about what they're, and you want me to invest in you in some way, really. And so that's really important. And then the other thing in a one-on-one or a smaller session is you have to show intellectual curiosity about the subject matter. So you don't just come in and just sort of, and you have like no curiosity, which means no questions and nothing insightful that you're trying to do. Because somebody will invest in you if they see that you're a person who's going to progress, that there's an intellectual curiosity. And you'd be amazed, like some of the companies that I invest in now, I want to see that in the entrepreneur. I don't want them to be like a flat line. I think that's really kind of boring. And I've often hired very eclectic people who actually don't have a direct background in what I'm doing. And I've had people like this one guy, I won't say his name, but he became a senior aide for Hillary Clinton. And he started kind of like how Matt did. He started with me as an intern. I put him through my boot camp. He came out of the thing. But this guy had an amazing trait because he was cocky as anything. But we had to kind of harness his skills. And he just developed this way of being able to push and to have an agenda and push really hard. And that's really important. You know, so you don't want to just stand there without any intellectual curiosity. And this guy displayed the intellectual curiosity and got really far, you know, with that. So I urge you to think about that when you're meeting with people and you're pitching a concept or pitching an idea. Remember, we're all in sales. We're all trying to move an idea, whether it's an NGO, whether it's a business or a company that you're working for. And if you're working inside of a company, you're going to find that you're going to be in a competitive situation inside of a company, and you're going to have a moment where you've got to put your idea on the table with someone else's idea. And what's going to be the differentiator? It's not just, well, I'm smarter, and I think mine is better, but if this person has built up all the other things in the bank, you know, and they've been really authentic, and they've showed the intellectual curiosity, the chances are that supervisor is going to go with that because they've got all the other pieces going, and then guess what's going to happen 2 years from now? They're going to be promoted over you. And so understanding how to work in that mix with a lot of people so that you can stand out. And so being authentic means being willing to say, I actually don't know how to do this. Can you help me? It gets back to part of what Matt was saying. The willingness to go with somebody and say, help me, mentor me, because people love to actually be asked, and you'd be amazed by that. I often say, you can't just sit there. So many of the interns over the years that I've like hired out of that bullpen are the people who've had the guts to come in and sort of say, I want this. And I had one person where I just kept having my assistant say, I don't want to talk to him. I don't want to talk to him. I don't want to. And he had this idea, you know, Eddie. And Eddie had this idea. And I was like, I made him work hard. And I smiled, like on the inside, because on the inside I was like, I want to help this kid out. And so one day, he just showed up at my door, and he told me, I have been trying to get to see you, and I've been canceled every time we've had a meeting. I said, really? And then I said, well, I don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to walk. So one of my things is to go on a walk with somebody. And I said, we're going to walk to the Metro. I said, tell me your idea. It was just like, so that's like that moment. And so like, don't wilt in that moment. I said, give me your idea. And first he was kind of, I said, give me your idea, Eddie. I don't have a lot of time. So Eddie started rallying off. And then the next thing I said, write it up. Doesn't count if you can't write it. I don't want to just hear it, write it. And then he wound up running this whole website and doing a really great job, you know, with it, and really at a young age being put in charge. And I said, it's yours. It's yours. I'm going to give you the budget. You're going to run it. And I'm going to be here. Then Eddie knew how to come back for help because I was watching him stumble through certain things. But I was like, he'll figure it out. Because I really believe in the power of the human spirit to do amazing things and to figure things out, you know. And unfortunately, we live in a world where you are going to have a lot of people who will try to put you in a certain niche, in a certain place. And they won't appeal to the most important power in the world, which is human aspiration. And that you aspire to get to a certain point. And what you just have to do is know that there are people who care about you and that want to see you get to a certain point. You want to find them, and you want to keep your eyes open. But what you want to do is not lose the belief in self. So I'll leave you with one other thought, and this applies back to someone like Matt. Whenever I hire somebody, I say, you know, there are only two things I can do for you, really, at the end of the day. One is I have what I call a toolbox. So some of the stuff I'm expressing here is what I call in the toolbox that you can apply anywhere. So I'm going to give you the toolbox, and then I said, here's the other one, which is really important, and that's really what I call true belief in self. Not the fake belief, where everybody say, of course I believe in myself, of course, and then you wilt. Real belief is like you'll take your point all the way to the edge, almost being embarrassed, because you believe so much. And I said, and if a person truly believes, and they understand the toolbox, the power of the human spirit is unbelievable. They will achieve amazing things. And with the joy that I have is just watching it, because people will do amazing things. And you will have people try to block you, just for the hell of it, or because they're jealous, because they feel that energy from you. And what you just have to emanate is don't spend any energy on the no's. And because I always say, and when we were starting One Economy, people were saying, but they're saying no. They think this is a crazy idea. And One Economy was a simple idea in the year 2000. Many of you were like, I don't know where you were. I was actually in the working world. You guys were like in grade school maybe, or not even that. But in the year 2000, And it was a simple concept, which would probably be inconceivable for you to think about now, but it was to bring broadband into affordable housing. Because what I was frustrated by was these ridiculous foundations who were pouring money into computer learning centers and feeling good about it. And I was like, really? And so I would challenge people and say, where do you and your family use the internet? At home. And so, well, why would a low-income person be any different, right? I said, think about, like, that single mom is going to come home from a hard day's work and say, kids, let's all gather up and go to the learning center together. Really? After work? Come on, she just wants to put the dinner on the table. And I challenged the orthodoxy. And in doing that, I quit a job where I was president to go work in a basement because I believed in this. And I would see these single moms and these individuals really believe in something for themselves and for their children. And I had to just fight. And I had all the no's and just fight. And I had a staff that just kept saying, well, people are laughing at us, they think this is a stupid idea. I had somebody say to me, well, the poor people, what are they going to do with the computer? They're going to steal it. And I said, well, it's hard to steal it when you own it. You know, so that was like one of the things, because like, we were helping them own it, so it's like this notion of stealing. And you would really unearth some of the bad and some of what the philanthropic world does. You know, patting themselves on the back, getting at this point, like, what are you really doing it for? Is it for the right reasons? Or are you really doing it for self-aggrandizement? And so my instruction to the staff is keep looking for the yeses. Because there are people out there who will say yes. And so you don't get down by all the no's. So I would rack up, 20 no's for the 2 that I would get that would come on board. So we went from 4 people in the basement to 120 people in 17 countries. And it just is one very small example of the power of yes, because there are people who you can find. And I just kept saying, go back out there and find them. They're out there. Where's your self-belief? Do you believe this? What's in your pitch? Because you have to go pitch it. And then look somebody in the eye, like I had to do many times, say, I need you. I can't do this without you. Can you put money into this? Ford Foundation was our first money. And I was talking to this guy who was kind of partially listening to me and still typing away at his computer while I was pouring out my heart. Finally, I said, Mill. And I said, this means so much, I'm going to quit my job. I turned around. I said, it means that much. This is the future. And he put money. And that's where God has started. And so every one of your pitches with the authenticity, every one of your pitches with the intimacy, and then being willing to believe in yourself and put yourself out there, and then tell the story. A good speech has an arc. It has a story. And make it interesting for the person on the other side. I have people coming in all the time, and they don't realize one of the most important things is like, please don't bore the person on the other end. And I'm sort of thinking about, and Matt would hear me when the person leaves, like I would say disaster, train wreck, like no shot, and it's just like they're just sitting there droning on, telling you that they have a 4-point plan, versus telling me about the problem that needs to be solved and how they're going to solve it with their idea. Think about how different that is, and just sort of, we do 4 things, good. It's out of context, and that's kind of boring. And I kind of want to know a little bit about you, because you're the engine that's going to get it done. And so those are just a few principles that I've tried to use, and all of that is about, quote, speaking in a public way, whether it's a small group or whether it's a large group. And it really can work. Every single person can do it. It's not easy, but you can do it. Just turn it into fun, and just put yourself out there as who you are. Because your story is a unique story, and people actually want to hear it. Everybody has a unique story, and it's rich and it's beautiful. And you just need to tell your story in the context of what you're trying to achieve. And you'll find a lot of people will say yes to you, and they'll want to hear it, and they'll want to believe it. So for me, this was a great opportunity to be in front of a remarkably smart group at a great school, and to be able to support a friend and a very special person in Matt. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt, but thank you very much.
We have a few minutes left. If anybody has any questions, either for myself or Ray. Ray, this is Lee.
Hi, Ray, it sounds like, well, first, thank you for coming. Great speech. I love the whole tools and all that stuff. It sounds like you have several, I don't want to say speeches prepared, but several, things that you talk about prepared, and you kind of fill it in to meet the audience. Is that accurate, or do you just...
Yeah, it's a good question. I have a viewpoint about the world and about self, and that stays with me. That's And yeah, and then I can weave around any subject, because what I was sharing very intimately was what I believe about the world. And that's what I'm saying about that's getting in touch with who you are. That's your voice. And I would often say to people, it's like, find your voice. And some people, and it's extraordinary, like some people they'll tell their voice through, like one of the interview questions I have, which is really deep. And I'll just imagine being in an interview with me, and I just say to you, what do you care about? And then I just stop. And they'll be like, well, work? And I said, I'm not leading you. It's just like, and out of it, I find that it'll tease out a voice. I've had people talk about their love for animals. I've had people tell me about their children. I've had people tell me about extraordinary things. You know, that is so interesting to me because you know what I'm looking for? Passion and the ability to tell their narrative. And that's why I asked that. So everybody, that's what I said, there's a unique story that people have and there's a frame. And so you just wrap that around. That's why you don't have, if you're telling that and that's authentic, why would you be nervous about that? And why would you stumble over that? Because that's so easy. That's your narrative. And so whether I was talking in front of a group of scientists, whether I was, a few months ago, I'm a trustee at Claremont McKenna, and so we have this technology program. And there were 100 and some folks there, faculty and students. And I gave this talk, and I said, I'm not going to stand up in front of all of you and talk about computers. I can barely turn mine on. So it's like crazy that I'm in front of a tech group. And so I just talked about some of the things that we talked about and life. And for those students who are all about to graduate, it was more about what do you care about? Like, what do you want to do in the world? It's like you're all smart. You have that. So I tailored it to that, and yet still was able to weave in some stories and other stuff, and it had an impact on people because I just wanted to be intimate. So it's a good question. What else? My friend from Germany.
Well, I don't really have a question. I can only say that I really agree with the point where you said don't say it just as a fact, but tie it into something. I mean, I work in the movie industry, and that's exactly what storytelling in the movie industry is. If you have a character that says, I'm like this, nobody's interested. But if he shows it through actions and the way he behaves and the way he interacts with different people, that's when you start believing in that character. Not by him just saying, hey, I'm the craziest person, but if he does crazy stuff or whatever his characteristic is, then you start believing it.
I had a young guy who was in an interview, and somehow we got into some topic, and he's the product, of a single mom. And he started talking about his mom, and he cried in the interview. And I thought it was extraordinary. And he didn't have the best skills. And this was a young African-American guy, and I thought, I'm in this position. Here's a guy who has upside. He showed me a side of himself. If I can't give him that opportunity, who will? And I hired him. And he did fine. And so that's what I'm saying, like you never know, but people ultimately, there's a touching of souls touching, seriously. And if you just channel that with who you are, which is very authentic, you'd be amazed at the connections that you'll make, because in many ways, we're all just seeking connections. And I really believe that. On one level, when you peel behind all the stuff, and you view a person through that lens versus like, oh, they're here and I'm here, and that's just nonsense. We're all here and human, and we just need to connect. And once you feel that, it's just not something you won't be nervous about. Just put it out there. What are they going to say? No, that's the worst thing ever? No, so what? You'll be fine. It doesn't change who you are. They said no, so what? Go to the next one, and go to the next one, go to the next one. Believe in it.
Kind of a comment, actually. You put, I believe his name was Eddie, in charge of his own project, and you said you kind of watched him struggle through and get through it himself. For me personally, if I'm in a situation like that where I don't know how to do something or anything like that, I find it's a lot more difficult to maybe study, read a book. It takes a lot more time than finding someone like yourself that knows how to do it and just talk with them real quick to figure out the fastest way through. How do you feel about that? It seems like you want them to have that struggle themselves.
Yeah, I want them to have both, because one of the things is, and I said this to Matt very early on, it's one thing to quote mentor somebody, right, when you're talking about it.
Right.
But if you never give them space and the opportunity to lead and the opportunity to do stuff, you're not really completing the package, because they've got to go through, some of that. And you're not going to let them go off the rails, and embarrass the institution. And sometimes I've taken it right up to the edge. I'm like, geez, you've got to get in. But you're watching it and you see it. And sometimes like Matt and I would talk about it, we'd watch it and we go, okay, we gotta assume we're gonna have to come in and kind of do that, but you're giving him an opportunity to sweat, you know, a little bit and go through that, and you grow from that. I had opportunities to sweat, make mistakes. I remember years ago telling my older deputy, and I had to appear in front of the legislature, and I had a SWAT about how the bonds worked, and I studied up a little bit. And I said, all right, none of you correct me. I'm in front of the legislature, and all I have to do is be smarter than them and get through it. And when I was done, I said, was I right? And he goes, well, 65% of it was right. The rest of it was probably on the record. All right, so it's like, whatever. You know, I got through, my bill got passed, and just like you move on in life. But I learned from that, you know, and I was just pretty good about not showing the bead of sweat here. But I was like, because at one point I was rattling off a lot of big words, and I figured that they were okay. And one guy said, I'm not quite fond of that. We have a grease board here. Can you show how the bond indenture works with the da-da-da-da-da-da? I was like, sure, of course. And I sort of got up there and drew stuff, you know, and put a lot of words out there with confidence. And I got through, and there were no follow-up questions because I don't think they understood it, you know, well enough to ask me any follow-up questions. I've never forgotten that, and I got through. So sometimes you just got to gut it out, you know. And so I gutted out, and I told them, don't correct me in front of everybody, because that actually would hurt my standing, you know, in front of them. Now, he would have come in if I said something illegal or just completely, but he said about 65% was right. That wasn't good. In some places, that was jumping to see. So I did all right.
Leo, I was going to say there's a really, one of the most impactful times that I had with Ray actually didn't really have to do with work at all, but rather a workplace. And the chief of staff had just left. I think he had been gone for a month, maybe Ray knows if it was a month or 6 weeks or something. And he left this office. I was still in a cubicle. And he left this office open. It was right next to Ray's room, and I knew that I was going to be a special assistant. And I was like, okay, he's going to call me in, and he's going to say, man, you can have the office now. And, you know, it never came. And then, because I was doing a schedule, I was like, oh, Ray's going to be gone for 2 weeks. And people, you know, everybody, you know, he was gone, and everybody would kind of come up to me and ask me, everybody, there's 6 people. So what are you doing out here? Are you just going to go in? I said, well, I don't know.
You see the way I'm looking at him.
Yeah.
I remember this. And I was pissed, but go ahead.
I can do this. Like, I don't know. It doesn't feel right. I mean, I know that it's probably going to be there, right? So I went through this like 2-week period where I didn't know what to do. I kind of knew it was coming. I was anxious. And at one point, one of the workers that we were with just said, "You think he's really going to care?" I mean, what is? It's Ray. He's not going to care. You probably didn't even know that there's an office next to him. And he said, "You should just move in." I said, "All right." And then Ray came back. And it was his first day. I'll never forget. He always has this walk where he's focused in the morning, he's walking to his office. Matt! Shit. Get out of my office. And we had this really cool discussion about, I'm not a very assertive person, as many of you know. And one of the things that he taught me was that you just have to ask. And he said, I would have been okay with it. I had no problem with it. I wanted you to ask. I wasn't going to give it to you. I wasn't going to let you take it. I just wanted you to ask. And it's been, the same thing happened when I asked him to come. I sent him a text message and I said, can you talk? And I picked up the phone with him and he says, well, I'm worried. Is everything okay? I said, right. Everything's fine. Can you come do this? Or do you want to come do this? He said, yeah, sure. And I don't have a problem asking where. And it was a very, and of course I got the office. But it was a very powerful thing for me to learn to sweat through and for him to be not happy about it, because it was about 5 or 6 weeks since one of, you know, somebody like me had just left him. And he was mad when I left him. And it was like a breakup, you know, you're not with that person anymore. And so I felt really bad about it, but at the same time it was one of those very important and I would say necessary pieces of life that you need to go through just to sweat it out. And he knew. And the whole time, just like your parents know. They know. Don't touch that.
Yeah, and I was
Don't
waiting
touch
for him to just ask, because there's such power in that. That's why I said people love to be asked, and you'd be amazed at how easy it is to get to a yes. And we concoct all of these scenarios, like in our mind, and most of that is like unnecessary. I knew the office was there, and I said, the little bastard needs to, you know, tell me, you know, and ask me about it. And then when I turned that corner and saw the lights on in there, I was livid, because he hadn't asked me, and that's when I walked in, I said, Matt. And so he knew to come in there, and then we spoke for about an hour. And so he kind of got it, but that was the point of it, was to just do that, the simple step, and the guts of sort of doing that versus this easy way out of sort of doing that, because people will say yes to you, you know, and everything. And the worst case scenario, you just said, wait or, you know, whatever. And so what? You know, you're still who you are. You're still a valued person. It doesn't define you and everything. So that's really good. Yes.
And about asking, I totally agree. That I always say to myself, if I'm afraid of asking, a no is always better than regretting not having
Yeah.
asked in the first place.
Exactly. Right.
Because, like, I remember when I was studying business back in Germany, and that was like a dual program with Siemens, and I was working in their HR department. And I always wanted to do something in the creative field, and so one day I opened up to my boss and told him, well, that's not really what I want to do. And then he said, okay. That was like the term before I had to write the thesis in the company. And it's like, okay, I'll give you 3 months. I won't tell your boss in your original office. But if he calls, I'll just let him know you're on like literature research in the library. Because I had that moment when I was sitting back home on my couch watching TV, someone playing guitar, and I used to play guitar. And my little daughter asked me, right, Daddy, you used to play that. And I don't want that to happen with you. And so if I had never asked him if I could like get the 3 months time to figure something out, I would have never found out that he was in the same position. So if you don't ask, you will always ask yourself, what if? What would have happened if I had asked?
That's right.
Anything else?
Yeah, I got one more.
Sure.
Sorry. How did you get those jobs if you?
It's so funny.
No, is it a relation?
No, you know, it's really funny because one time,
Is it the political?
no, you know what it is? It's funny because one time I was, and I'll just tell you this quick story and then I'll actually answer your question. I had someone like you once with a bunch of students. I was recruited to do a job that I really wanted, but I felt like I should be older to do it because it was like, it was too easy, and that's not to put down academia, but it was going to be dean of Willamette for the business school. Now I'm not a business, so I'm sitting, so you had to do this presentation in front of students and faculty, right? I do this whole presentation about the theory of business education, right? So I spoke from my frame, and so one of the students said, Mr. Ramsey says, I mean this with all due respect. He goes, you're a lawyer, right? Right, and you don't have an MBA. And how would you, basically, he sort of said, how would you be qualified to run the business school? And so you know what I did? It was very authentic. I just laughed. I said, that's a great question. And I said, the president is right there. He should answer that. So it was like the best answer because it was like, why do I, I'm here. He asked me to come. And they're interested. I actually got offered the job, but I didn't say no. Here's my philosophy with this, is there are 2 things to do. And this has been my whole formula. And part of this is, without sort of getting into any kind of proselytizing, I'm a very spiritual person. Spiritual, not religious, but spiritual. So I do pray. But I often talk about, there are 3 things that you get that you should look for in every job. That are the 3 takeaways that no one can take away from you. And each of them builds on each other. One is, can I get skills? What are the relationships that I can keep? And what's the body of work that I can leave behind? So with each successive thing, what I've tried to do is build a level of skills. And then put myself in a position with a series of relationships, with that philosophy of every opportunity is a marketing opportunity, be in the right spot. And if I have skills, and I have relationships, and I'm in the right spot, the phone will ring, or I will dial the phone to be in a position. So getting known at the state, the last story I'll tell you, this was like an audacious and crazy thing that I did. I probably wouldn't do it at this age. But I was frustrated by just making a lot of money as a lawyer. I thought that there was more to life. And I was sitting in my office. My secretary, named Lenore, was a wonderful assistant. And I said to her, I'm going to leave the office for the rest of the day. It's a true story. She said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to drive to the Capitol, the state Capitol. It's a true story. And she said, for what? And I said, I'm going to meet people. I'm going to make something happen. This is a true story. This is crazy. She's like, okay, you're going to leave the office. And so I get in the car, and I was just like, I've had it. I just don't want to, I got to break out. This is a true story. And I'm driving in my car, and I'm halfway to the Salem, the state Capitol, and I was like, well, when I arrive, what exactly am I going to do? So I arrive, and I remember thinking, well, I don't know my state senator. Maybe she's here. She happened. Their secretary was there. I schmoozed the attractive secretary and said, I've always wanted to meet Margaret and talk to her. She said, Margaret doesn't have a lot of time, please. So I got in to meet Margaret. Margaret was packing up stuff, so I don't have a lot of time. She says, I'm going to a reception. And at the reception will be always people on the governor's staff. And the head of executive appointments would be there. So I told her about my ambition to go into government. And so she just turned me loose at the reception. I had a stack of business cards. I walked up to people. I said, I work at Stoll Reeves, the biggest firm in the state. I care about public policy. And I'd love to one day be involved in policy. People took my card. I then took their cards. I set up a series of breakfast meetings to meet with them, to have something to say, intellectual curiosity. And then after a while, it became this funny, self-perpetuating loop. People started, this Ramsey guy is good. I don't know what they knew I was good at. And then the next thing you know, I was getting offers. I mean, it just became like a funny thing. He's really good. I don't know how that, so somehow that kind of came out of the mix, and I'm just being honest. And then they offered me this post in economic development, which was the make-do job, which was like, that was the show me. And I knew it. And I was like, this is my moment. And I'm going to go in there and I'm going to show people. And then that's when 2 years later, the big promotion, and then it was off to the races. So carpe diem, you do seize that moment. Everybody gets moments, but we often don't see it as a moment. And that's what I mean. It's like, you don't nail it in with anything. And so I could have just gotten there, sat on my ass, and just kind of did whatever. But I was like, I'm going to go for it. Especially early, because what you're doing is you're establishing your brand. And so that brand will stick with you for a lifetime. And so what's your brand? And so if you get to craft that in that first job, in that second job, that's your brand. That will stay with you, stamped on your forehead. So that's been the fun. That was a little bit of, and so everything else like that. And she somehow let me into that meeting, and that was a big moment. And then once I walked in that room, I was like, I'm just going to do it. I was nervous in my stomach, but I was like, I can walk up to these people. They're just people, and communicate with them. That's what I mean. So don't be afraid to walk in. And if it's nerve-wracking going to a reception, which it can be, just say I'm going to meet 3 people. And then my expression is stay present. And so what I would say to somebody who's quote a big person, I would ask them at the end of the meeting, is it okay if I stay present with you? It means light touch, a little bit of communication every now and then. I just wanted to catch you up that I graduated. Just wanted to let you know that I've, blah, blah, blah. People say, oh, that's nice. That's nice. So that when you need something, it's not out of the blue. It's like, and I'll say, oh, I remember him, or I remember her. She sent me this really nice note and graduated from Loyola Marymount. That's really cool. And then here comes their resume, mysteriously, later. And then you kind of have a nice little feeling about that. So that resume, you say to the HR, take a look at this person. That's a nice little endorsement. Next thing you know, you get a phone call. That's how it works. Because think about the big stacks that people get. What are you going to do to get your resume through the stack? Everybody's got degrees. So all those little touches are worth it. That would be my advice, but I've used every one of those techniques.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming, and thank you again, Ray, for being here. I kind of liked it that it was this way. It's a little bit better with my MBA career. And I hope you guys got a little bit out of it, or a lot out of it. And if there's anything else you need, feel free to let me know or let Ray know. And I have to take him to Hollywood. Soho House. So I will be at law class today. I sent him an email.
It's literally a meeting where I'm asking somebody for money.
And he never stops.
My investments.
How many meetings did you have?
4 or 5.
And he goes to New York tomorrow. Thankfully, I don't do the booking. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good questions.
No, it's,
Super.
politics is,
Yeah, and you'll know how to also read. That's interesting.
So you got the Toastmasters meeting tomorrow? Because I have another board. It's really cool.
Yeah, you got some good
Yeah,
exercise.
there's business law.
not yet, it's really, it's, the weekend that's already John Mackey.
All right.
Yeah.
That's okay. We'll do one of yours.
Yeah.
We'll go
I think
bowling.
it's better.
Yeah, we'll go bowling.
It's too hard to try to.
Yeah, because I'm really interested in that space.
I was totally.
So we should talk about, I'm serious, I'm very interested.
We just
goes
had-
like just. And And they should. I mean, that's the way. They don't literally leave. They just. No, I don't want to deal with school.
I've got an interesting concept in that space, of something I can't say, but it's something that I can talk with you.
Yeah, I think we should just do one
It's a
today.
really cool
Those two.
approach to using
Not close to 5
that.
minutes.
That'd be
It would be our
birthday.
birthday.
We'll chat.
Good.
Research it. That's
I'll-
really cool.
We have like.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Sir, good to be here. I hope that was. Sounds like you're gonna be in DC.
But even if
Which will be
you
fun.
are,
So
but
Matt
like,
knows how to
I like that.
reach, you know,